the idea of a lot of the classic fantasy tropes. And then I said, what I'd really like to do with this book is have that trilogy become the mythology and foundation for a later trilogy set in more of a 20th or 21st century technology level set in the same world. Because I had never really seen an epic fantasy make that jump. There are epic fantasies that will change technology slowly as they go along, but I had never seen one really do that. It seems epic fantasy tends to be static. If you read an epic fantasy world, it's always going to be a fantasy world. And I wanted to take that magic and write an urban fantasy using that magic and that world. Then I eventually wanted to write a science fiction trilogy set in the same setting, with the same magic and mythology set hundreds of years after that in the age of space exploration. When I had a few months off last year after finishing the previous Wheel of Time book, I took a few months off and I was planning to write a short story that was going to be the start of a little bit of a bridge between the two trilogies. And I am incapable of writing things shortly. If you were following my website at the time, you know what happened. And I actually tried a couple ideas for the short story I didn't like, and I tossed them, and I started working on one with a little bit more of an extensive outline. And not really that surprisingly to me, it became a novel. I downplayed it as I was tweeting about it and things, but I was pretty sure after I tossed the original premise, which was a short story premise, and picked up this premise, it was going to get bigger. This is not the second trilogy. This, as I said, is a bridge. So the whole idea of 3 trilogies is kind of a little bit out the window now, simply because I've already written a book in between them. This is set 300 years after the last Mistborn book. And a lot of those things have become the mythological lore for this world. And this is not 21st century. This is my analog for this was 1910 London or New York, and there are going to be differences, vast differences, but that's kind of where my baseline was that I worked from. Just as Mistborn, the original trilogy, my baseline was actually 1820s England was my baseline for that. And so it's been 300 years, and I'm just going to read to you from the prologue, all right?
Cool.
Wax crept along the ragged fence in a crouch, his boots scraping the dry ground. He held up his Styrian 36 beside his head, the long silvery barrel caked with red clay dust. The waist-high fence was flimsy, the wood grayed with time, held together with fraying lengths of rope. It smelled of age. Even the worms had given up on this wood long ago. He peeked up over the knotted boards, scanning the empty town. Blue lines hovered in his vision, extending from his chest to point at nearby sources of metal, a result of his allomancy. Burning steel did that. It let him see the location of sources of metal, and then push against them if he wanted. It was his weight against the weight of the item. If it was heavier, he was pushed back. If he was heavier, it was pushed forward. In this case, however, he didn't push. He just watched the line to see if any of the metal was moving. None of it was. Nails holding together buildings, spent shells laying scattered in the dust, or horseshoes piled at the silent smithy. All were motionless as the old hand pump planted in the ground to his right. Wary, he too remained still. Steel continued to burn comfortably in his stomach, and so, as a precaution, he gently pushed outward from himself in all directions. It was a trick he mastered a few years back. He didn't push on any specific metal objects, but created a kind of defensive bubble around himself. Any metal that came streaking in his direction would be thrown slightly off course. It was far from foolproof. He could still get hit. But shots would go wild, not striking where they seemed to be aimed. It had saved his life on a couple of occasions. He wasn't even certain how he did it. Allomancy was often an instinctive thing for him. Somehow, he even managed to exempt the metal he carried and didn't push his own gun from his hands. That done, he continued along the fence, still watching the metal lines, to make sure nobody was sneaking up on him. Beltrell had once been a prosperous town. That had been 20 years back. Then a clan of Kolos had taken up residence nearby. Things hadn't gone well. Today, the dead town seemed completely empty, though he knew it wasn't so. Wax had come here hunting a psychopath. He wasn't the only one. He grabbed the top of the fence and hopped over, feet grinding red clay. Crouching low, he ran in a squat over to the side of the old blacksmith's forge. His clothing was terribly dusty, but well tailored. A fine suit, a silver cravat at the neck, twinkling cufflinks in the cuffs of his fine white shirt. He looked out of place, as if he were planning to attend a fine ball back in Ellendale, rather than scrambling through a dead town in the roughs hunting a murderer. Completing the ensemble, he wore a bowler hat on his head to keep off the sun. A sound. Someone stepping on a board across the street, making it creak. It was so faint he almost missed it. Wax reacted immediately, flaring the steel that burned inside his stomach. He pushed on a group of nails in the wall beside him just as the crack of a gunshot split the air. His sudden push caused the wall to rattle, the old rusty nails straining in their places. His push shoved him to the side and he rolled across the ground. A blue line appeared for an eye blink. The bullet, which hit the ground where he had hit a moment before. As he came up from his roll, a second shot followed. This one came close, but it bent just a hair out of the way as it neared him. Deflected by a steel bubble, the bullet zipped past his ear. Another inch to the right, and he'd gotten it in the forehead, steel bubble or no. Breathing calmly, he raised his stereo and sighted on the balcony of the old hotel across the street where the shot had come from. The balcony was fronted by the hotel's sign, capable of hiding a gunman. Wax fired, then pushed on the bullet, slamming it forward with extra thrust to make it faster and more penetrating, more accurate. He didn't use typical lead bullets. He needed something stronger. The steel-alloyed bullet hit the balcony. His extra power caused it to puncture the wood and hit the man behind. The blue line leading to the man's gun quivered as he fell. Wax stood up slowly, brushing the dust from his clothing. At that moment, another shot cracked the air. He cursed, reflexively pushing against the nails again, though his instincts told him he'd be too late. By the time he heard the shot, it was too late for pushing to help. This time he was thrown to the ground. That force had to go somewhere, and if the nails couldn't move, he had to. He grunted as he hit and raised his revolver, dust sticking to the sweat of his hand. He searched frantically for the one who fired at him. They'd missed. Perhaps the steel bubble had. A body rolled off the top of the blacksmith shop and thumped down to the ground with a puff of red dust. Wax blinked, then raised his gun up beside his head and moved over beside the fence again, crouching down for cover. He kept an eye on the blue almantic lines. They could warn him if someone got close, but only if the person was carrying or wearing metal. The body that had fallen beside the building didn't have a single line pointing at it. However, another set of quivering lines pointed to something moving along the back of the forge. Wax leveled his gun, taking aim as a figure ducked around the side of the building and ran toward it. The woman wore a white duster, reddened at the bottom. She kept her dark hair pulled back in a tail, wore trousers and a white belt, with thick boots on her feet. She had a squarish face, a strong face, with lips that often rose slightly to the side in a half smile. Wax heaved a sigh of relief and raised his gun beside his head. "Leslie, you knocked yourself to the ground again?" she asked as she reached the cover of the fence beside him. "You've got more dust on your face than Miles has scowls. Maybe it's time for you to retire, old man." "Leslie, I'm 3 months older than you are." "Those are 3 long months." She peeked up over the fence. "Seen anyone else?" "I dropped a man on the balcony," Wax said. Couldn't see if it was bloody tan or not." "It wasn't," she said. "He wouldn't have tried to shoot you from so far away." Wax nodded. Tan liked things personal, up close. The psychopath lamented when he had to use a gun, and he rarely shot someone without being able to see the fear in their eyes. Wax nodded toward the fallen man beside the wall. "Your work?" "He had a bow," she said. "Stone arrowheads. Almost had you from above." "Thanks." She shrugged, eyes glittering in satisfaction. Those eyes now had lines at the sides of them, weathered by the rough's harsh sunlight. There had been a time when she and Wax had kept tally of who had saved the other most often. They'd both lost track years ago. "Cover me," Wax said softly. "With what?" she asked. "Paint? Kisses? You're already covered with dust." Wax raised an eyebrow at her. "Sorry," she said, grimacing. "I've been playing cards with Wayne too much lately." He snorted and ran in a crouch over to the fallen corpse and rolled it over. He'd been a cruel-faced man with several days of stubble on his cheeks. The bullet wound bled out his right side. "I think I recognize him," Wax thought to himself as he went through the man's pockets and came up with some bullets and a drop of blood-red glass. He hurried back to the fence. "Well?" Leslie asked. "Donald's crew," Wax said, holding up the drop of glass. Bastards, Leslie said. They couldn't just leave us to it, could they? You did shoot his son, Leslie. And you shot his brother. Mine was self-defense. Mine was too, she said. That kid was annoying. Besides, he survived. Missing a toe? You don't need 10, she said. I have a cousin with 4. She does just fine. Leslie raised her revolver, scanning the empty town. Of course, she does look kind of ridiculous. Cover me. With what? She just grinned and ducked out from behind the cover, scrambling across the ground toward the smithy. Harmony, Wax thought with a smile. I love that woman. He watched for more gunmen, but Leslie reached the building without any further shots being fired. Wax nodded to her, then dashed across the street toward the hotel. He ducked inside, checking the corners for foes. The common room was empty, so he took cover in the doorway, waving toward Leslie. She ran down to the next building on her side of the street and checked it out. Donald's crew. Yes, Wax had shot his brother. The man had been robbing a railway car at the time. From what he understood, though, Donald hadn't ever cared for his brother. You know, the only thing that riled Donald was losing money, which was probably why he was here. He put a price on Bloody Tan's head for stealing a shipment of his Bendaloid. Donald probably hadn't expected Wax to come hunting Tan the same day he did, and his men had standing orders to shoot Wax or Leslie if seen. Wax was half tempted to leave the dead town and let Donald and Tan have at it. The thought made his eye twitch, though. He'd promised to bring Tan in, and that was that. Leslie waved from the inside of her building, then pointed toward the back. She was going to go out in that direction and creep along behind the next set of buildings. Wax nodded and made a curt gesture. He tried to hook up with Wayne and Barrow, who had gone to check the other side of town. Leslie vanished, and Wax picked his way through the old hotel toward the side door. He passed old dirty nests made by both rats and men. This town picked up miscreants the way a dog picked up fleas.